What's up guys, I am Rob Federic and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to create this effect. Now, this is going to require a third-party plugin called Saber that you can get from videocopilot.net. I've linked it in the description below so you can download it, install it into After Effects, and then we should be good to go. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So I have this shot over here of me wielding my Disney lightsaber without a light. Now, the most optimal way to actually do this is to have a lightsaber that actually lights up, because the residual light that's refracting off the lightsaber will create a glow and more match what an actual lightsaber would be if it were real. So to have a light up lightsaber is the ideal situation, but I'm going to show you how to do this even if you have no light. So again, you can use a stick, you can use a sword, you can use whatever you want. You may not even have a blade. You could just have a hilt and we can still make this effect look really, really good. Let's take this no light effect shot and drag it into a new comp. Now that we have this footage into the comp, we can start to get to work. So what we're going to do is go to Layer, create a new solid. We're going to title this Saber, and we're going to hit OK. And now that the solid is in the comp, we're going to go to Effect, Video Copilot, and Saber. Now we have this plugin that has just this saber that you can actually move around and manipulate. So the first thing that we want to do is go into the render settings of the plugin, and then go to composite settings and set it to transparent. And that way we can see where we're going to line up our lightsaber with our lightsaber footage. And so we're going to grab the end point of the lightsaber and set that somewhere up where we assume the tip of the lightsaber is going to be. And then the origin point, and we're going to set that right at the hilt. Now granted, this isn't the right size for this lightsaber, but we're going to manipulate that in a second. So what we want to do is take the core size in the effects and amp that right up. And we want to create enough thickness that it's going to cover whatever blade that you are using as a reference for the saber. And now that you have that, that already looks pretty good. Saber's a really, really strong plugin. It does wonders, you know what I mean? It's fantastic. Now, when you deal with glow effects in After Effects, there's sort of a problem that there's a disconnect. The glows don't really feel realistic. And there's a really cool trick that you can do to sort of bypass that, especially with this lightsaber effect. So what we want to do is toggle the switches and modes to make sure that we have the transfer modes available in our timeline. We're going to select Saber, and we're going to go to normal, and we're going to click it, and we're going to set it down to screen. Once you set it down to screen, it sort of changes the blending mode to match the footage a little bit better, and it seems like it's actually coming from the footage itself rather than it was composited over. So now that we have our saber lined up and it's set to screen, what we're going to do is make sure that we keyframe the core start and the core end, and we're going to go frame by frame, hitting page up and down, and just advance a couple of frames and just line up the Saber plugin with our actual lightsaber. When you get to a point where the lightsaber is moving and there's a little bit more of this sort of motion blur, that occurs right here, right? The Saber plugin is actually really, really good at interpolating frames to make it look like it matches that motion blur. However, there's a couple things you need to do. So what you need to do is set it, as soon as it starts to hit sort of that motion blur, you want to set the core start and the core end to line up as best as possible with the saber. And then you're going to advance a couple more frames and then move the core start and core end to line it up. Now that still doesn't really quite match. It's still, you can still see a little bit of the white that's back there. But what you do is hit U, the letter U on the saber layer, and now you're going to be able to see all your keyframes. And then you can go back and you should see that it sort of starts to blur. However, it's not quite lined up yet, so we might have to do a little bit of tweaking. And what you do is, like, as soon as you see it that it's off, you sort of select the saber layer, you go into the effect, just make sure you click saber so that you can get your handles again, and you line it up as best as possible and sort of reverse engineer it if need to. to match the blur. There's another trick that you can do. You know, if you run into a situation like this, for example, right, where I have a solid sort of single blade and there's a lot of motion blur and I'm moving forward and I'm not really seeing the blur, you can set 3 points of keyframes, meaning a beginning, a middle, and an end here. And what you can do is, if you go back, see, it doesn't really line up with the blur. But if you delete the middle keyframes, now you suddenly get a blur. So that's another little trick. If you're going through the footage and it's not quite lining up with the blur, you can do that. And then you can tweak the middle setting again. Once you get the blur, you can sort of fix that and have it match a little better. So that when you move it, you know, again, you can delete the middle frames that don't match the blur. And again, you don't want to go frame by frame on these long motion blur sections, because if you do, the software will think that it's just sort of moving in place. It's better to have a couple of frames in between the gaps, so that way the blur sort of matches. The other thing that you can do, again, is make sure that you enable the universal motion blur up here in the timeline. And if you toggle the switches and modes, you go back to these toggles over here and you set the motion blur for the layer, and that'll add just a little bit more blur. Okay, so now that we have our lightsaber tracked and it's matching the movement of the footage, now we're gonna go in and tweak some settings in the Saber plugin to make it look even better. So the first thing we wanna do is make sure that we go here into the flicker settings and add a little bit of a flicker. And the reason for that is that we wanna create more realism in our light. Lightsabers are pulsating with energy, and they should have a little bit of flicker to sort of match the shutter rate of the camera and make it feel like it was actually shot that way rather than composited afterwards. And so what we want to do is add just like about, 37%. You can do more or less if you want to. Now, by adding that flicker effect, you can see that it already adds a dynamic to the lightsaber effect, and it creates more of a real-life physics to what this light would actually do. Next thing I want to do is go into the distortion settings and go and augment the glow distortion. We want to keep it to smoke, and we want to set it to about 5 or 6%. And the reason for that is that it's going to create a subtle sort of smoky aura around the lightsaber. And the reason for that is that space has atmosphere. There's oxygen, there's particles, there might be smoke, there might be something that's in the room. And if you have the light sort of look like it's interacting with the atmosphere in the space, it's just gonna add that much more realism to your lightsaber. So we wanna set that to 5 or 6, that's pretty good. You could do more if you want to. It just really enhances the smoke. The only thing is that once you start to go too much, the effect starts to fall apart and it looks fake. So we want to make sure that we keep it as subtle as possible. And subtlety is really your best friend when it comes to composites like this. So you could, if you were shooting in sort of like some foggy world, you could add a little bit more so that it looks like it's interacting with the fog. But since I'm indoors, I'm thinking about 5 is just enough to add dimension to the lightsaber and make it look like it's interacting with the atmosphere in the scene. Now, the next thing you can do is go into the glow settings and then tweak sort of the glow intensity modifiers, right? Where you can sort of manipulate how bright you want the lightsaber. You can do multipliers where it's going to stretch or shrink the glow. It's really up to you at this point. I personally don't like to tweak these settings way too much, because it really can become a little bit tedious and you can mess up your effect. But I like to add just like bring down a little bit of the glow multiplier and then just increase bring down a little bit of the size right there so that it just creates a little bit more brightness. You could also tweak the glow spread a little bit if you wanted to, and the core size a little bit more if you need to, or the glow bias, which is going to add more brightness to your lightsaber. Now that's looking pretty good to me. I'm indoors, like I said, I set the core size to about 42, so my glow bias is 0.68 and my glow spread is 0.82, and the glow multiplier is about 99.14, and the glow settings are size multipliers like 1.97. Now there's a whole bunch of other glow intensity parameters there. You can tweak it to your heart's content. I would suggest not messing too much with it, because this is giving us a really, really good result. Now remember that this is just an effect that's added on, and if you had a light up lightsaber, you'd have this residual light that just sells a little bit more of the realism of the effect. But since we don't have that, we're actually going to replicate it. And this is going to push your effect from amateur to pro level. The more you focus on how your visual effects impact the scene in subtle ways, the more realistic it'll be for the viewer. So we're going to go ahead and select our original footage layer and hit Control D to duplicate it. Then we're going to go into the Effects and Presets window. We're going to type in Lumetri Color, and we're going to drag the Lumetri Color effect onto that layer. We're going to go into the basic correction and lower the temperature down to blue so that the shot looks really nice and cool. We're going to also increase the tint just a smidge, and we're going to bring the exposure up about 1. You may want to also lower the contrast a little bit. And then we're going to take our pen tool and we're going to create a little mask around the areas where we think that the light would sort of radiate in this. Now, obviously that looks like crap. What we want to do is select the layer, hit F to feather the mask, and we're going to feather it quite a bit. And just by adding that, you can just see how much this already adds to the effect. Now, obviously the lightsaber moves, so we're going to have to move the mask accordingly. And so we're going to hit M and mark a keyframe on the mask path. We're going to move a couple of frames ahead, and we're just going to tweak the mask as best we can to sort of match the movement. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can spend a lot of time on this if you really want to, but because the mask is feathered, you know, you can do sort of these broad strokes and it will land the effect. You don't want to, you know, overdo the mask. You don't want everything to light up. You know, you just want like smaller areas depending on the proximity of the lightsaber to your body. Now, when it goes over here and you see it on the wall, you don't really want it to do that because it's not really that close to the wall. If it were, you could continue to do that, absolutely, because it'll match sort of the lighting that you want. So now that we've tracked the mask to match the movement of our lightsaber, we want to add one more trick that's going to just give this effect that much more of a cinematic look and just add a little bit of epicness to the effect as a whole. So having the lightsaber footage here, you can take a picture of a flare, just like this one, black background, take this flare, and you're going to drag this image onto the scene. Now, granted, it's going to be black. We don't want to do that. We're going to set the transfer mode once again to screen. And now we have this image of a flare that we can sort of drop anywhere. In this case, we want it to be coming from the right side of the frame. So I'm just going to hit R to rotate that and then just go 180 degrees. And now I have it rotated so that I can put it anywhere I want on the right. Now, we also want to create some sort of flicker with this. There's a really cool, neat trick on how to do that. We want to make sure that the flare sort of ignites when the lightsaber is mostly in the frame. So we're going to go and hit T for opacity. We're going to bring it down. We're going to just go back a little bit in time, hit set a keyframe to 0, and then we're going to go to all the way to the end of the footage, and we're going to set it to about 100. And then we're going to select both keyframes, go to the wiggler, set the frequency to 18, set the magnitude to 42, and hit apply. And now you're going to have this sort of flickering effect that should match the flickering of your lightsaber. I also like to add an ignition burst flare as well, just right by the hilt. It helps mask a little bit of the blending with the core, but it also gives it that little bit of epic flair and also a little bit more of a physics rendering where it looks like the ignition of the lightsaber is where it's most concentrated and at its brightest. So you can always add another picture of a flare and track it the way that you did to the lightsaber frame by frame and add the wiggler effect and flicker it, and you'll have a nice little hilt effect that adds just that much more essence to the effect. And that's it. All you got to do now is add some killer sound effects and your lightsaber effects are good to go. So hopefully you learned something from this tutorial. You found some value in this. If you did, I'd like to welcome you to like and subscribe, and be sure to check out my channel for more VFX and filmmaking tutorials. And with that, let's stay creative, guys. I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.